Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. Lucy sat at the back of the church hall, watching yet another friend tie the knot beneath satin ribbons and soft hymns. The bride, Amarachi, glowed as she walked down the aisle, her smile unshaken by the heat or the flash of cameras. Beside Lucy, her close friend, Clara, nudged her gently and whispered something about how soon it would be her turn, but Lucy only smiled faintly. She clapped when others clapped, stood when they stood, even posed for group photos, but deep inside she felt like a stranger in a celebration that only reminded her of everything she didn't have. As Amarachi leaned into her groom's arms for the kiss, Lucy's eyes slipped briefly to her phone. No messages from User. He promised to come, then said work came up. She didn't ask questions. She had long stopped expecting much on days like this. The drive home was long, made longer by the silence in the passenger seat where User should have been. Her makeup was already smudged by the time she got to her compound gate. She parked, turned off the ignition, and sat still for a moment. From a distance, she could hear her neighbor's children laughing and playing. Inside her flat, she moved through the room slowly, like someone learning to walk in the dark. Her living room was just as she had left it, tidy, untouched. On the table lay the throw pillow User had once held while teasing her about her obsession with romantic movies. She smiled at the memory, but it quickly faded. She poured herself a glass of water, sat down, and scrolled through old photos of her and User. 2 years of moments, birthdays, beach dates, movie nights, all full of joy. All full of waiting. She had never pressured him, never asked too many questions. She believed love should grow freely, like a flower, not be forced. But now, everything around her spoke of time slipping away. Her mother had stopped asking about wedding plans, but Lucy could feel the tension in every phone call. Friends who once envied her strong relationship were now sharing their engagement pictures. She told herself not to compare, but it was hard not to notice that User avoided conversations about the future like they were traps. And still, she loved him. Deeply. Painfully. Even when he forgot her birthday last year. Even when he changed the topic anytime marriage was mentioned. He had a gentle voice, warm hands, and the kind of quiet presence that made her feel safe when he wanted to. That was the part that confused her the most. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unfaithful, as far as she knew. But there was a distance in him that no amount of love seemed able to cross, and lately Lucy had begun to wonder if love alone could build a life. Or if, maybe, love wasn't the only thing a woman needed. Lucy stood by the window of her office, watching the city begin its slow descent into evening. Lagos traffic was already piling up, and the honking outside rose like an impatient chant. Her colleague, Indy, had just dropped off an invitation to another bridal shower, this time for their junior, Adiz. Lucy took the envelope with a polite smile, but her fingers tightened around it once Ndidi walked away. She opened it without ceremony and skimmed through the cursive writing. Pink balloons, brunch dresses, a garden party at a private venue in Lekki. Everyone had started getting younger, it seemed, or maybe Lucy was just getting tired. She placed the card inside her drawer and sighed. Her phone vibrated beside her with a text from User, "Works tight. Can't call tonight." No greeting. No warmth. Just a short sentence like an excuse on a paper slip. She locked her phone and pressed her forehead to the window pane, letting the cool glass steady her thoughts. That weekend, she found herself sitting across from her friend Clara at a cafe, half listening to conversations about bridal colors and decorators. Clara had just gotten engaged, and her excitement poured from her like fresh perfume. She showed off her ring, talked about her fiancé's surprise proposal at a rooftop restaurant, and laughed easily. Lucy joined in, nodding and smiling, but there was a strange quietness in her chest. She wasn't envious, at least not in the bitter sense, but there was a longing, sharp and undeniable, that settled just beneath her ribs. When Clara leaned forward and asked, "So when is User going to pop the question?" Lucy hesitated. She sipped her drink slowly, as if the question needed dilution. "Soon," she said, forcing the word out with a kind of practiced ease. But even as she said it, something cracked beneath her smile. Later that night, when she replayed the moment in her mind, it felt like she had lied not to Clara, but to herself. Days turned into quiet spaces filled with second guesses. Lucy noticed things she used to ignore. Usar had stopped asking how her day went. He no longer kissed her forehead when she came over. Sometimes he'd sit beside her in silence, scrolling through his phone, as if her presence was just furniture. She started staying longer in front of the mirror each morning, checking if something had changed in her, if she had grown less attractive, less interesting. She wondered if maybe she had become invisible to the person she still saw as everything. One evening, as they watched a film in his living room, Lucy turned to him and said, "Do you still see us together in 5 years?" User paused the movie, looked at her like she had asked something foreign, and shrugged. "5 years is a long time, babe. Let's not overthink." That night, Lucy lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His words echoed again and again. Not a no. Not a yes. Just a vague deflection. And for the first time, the thought came uninvited, but clear, what if this man isn't going to choose you? It was during a rainy Saturday afternoon that the idea first took root. Lucy and EJM sat in the corner of a quiet restaurant, the clatter of cutlery and soft music barely reaching their table. They'd both ordered pepper soup, but only EJM was eating. Lucy stirred hers idly, her thoughts clearly somewhere else. EJM leaned in, concerned. "You've been off for weeks, Lucy." "You want to talk?" At first, Lucy shook her head, but then the words came slowly, like water from a tight tap. She spoke about the silence, the shrinking space between her and User, the way every month that passed without a proposal felt like another crack forming in her spirit. "I'm not getting any younger," she said, voice low. "I don't even want to." Ijeoma listened carefully, then asked the question Lucy had feared most. "Do you think he'll ever marry you?" Lucy didn't answer. She only looked down at her untouched soup, her silence louder than any reply. That night, Lucy lay awake in her room, the rain now just a memory on her window pane. Her thoughts spun like clothes in a washing machine, overlapping, tangled, relentless. What if she gave up and someone else came along and User suddenly decided he was ready? What if she left and never found someone who made her feel as safe, as seen, as whole? But more than anything, what if she stayed, waiting endlessly for a commitment that would never come? The fear was too large to name. Then a different thought entered, quiet but persistent. What if he had no choice? She sat up slowly in bed, heartbeat ticking louder now. It felt like a solution wrapped in danger, like fire offering warmth but threatening to burn. If she got pregnant, he'd have to marry her. It wouldn't be just about her anymore. A child would change things. He would step up. He would stay. He would love her more deeply, wouldn't he? The thought scared her, but also calmed her. It gave her something she hadn't felt in months: control. Over the following days, Lucy moved carefully, as if navigating a delicate bridge. She kept her routine normal, never letting User sense that her thoughts had shifted. But each time they were intimate, she quietly skipped her contraceptives. She didn't tell anyone, not even Ijeoma. The plan felt too private, too fragile to share again. She watched User closely, looking for signs of warmth, commitment, affection, anything to assure her that what she was doing wasn't a gamble but a necessary step. When he held her after sex, she imagined it was deeper than comfort. When he bought her suya on his way home, she counted it as care. She needed to believe this would work. Each month, she waited with quiet hope, tracking her cycle in a private journal tucked inside her wardrobe drawer. Then, one morning, alone in the bathroom, her hands trembling, she stared at the pregnancy test's two clear, unwavering lines. Her knees gave way slightly as she sat on the closed toilet seat, heart racing. She wasn't scared. Not yet. For now, she was victorious. She had done it. And she believed with everything in her that User would soon show her a love deeper than she had ever known. Lucy rehearsed his reaction in her head 100 times before she told him. She imagined his eyes lighting up, his arms pulling her in tightly, his voice whispering words of reassurance and joy. She dressed up that evening in a soft cream blouse and a pair of jeans that hugged her gently, casual but presentable. Her face carried a glow she didn't need to force. She cooked User's favorite, spaghetti jollof with fried plantain, and set the table with care, placing the small white stick with the two pink lines in a gift box beside his plate. The moment he walked in, her heart began to pound in rhythm with each step he took. She greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, nervous and excited, as he dropped his bag lazily and sat at the dining table. He opened the box out of curiosity, lifting the plastic test slowly. He stared at it blankly for a second too long. Lucy leaned forward, almost bursting. "We're going to have a baby," she said, voice trembling with hope. But User didn't smile. He didn't blink. His expression turned unreadable, then hard. He pushed the test strip back into the box like it burned him. "What's this, Lucy?" His voice was low, but sharp. She laughed softly, thinking he was joking. "I confirmed it twice. I'm pregnant." He stood up without touching his food. "You need to take it out." Her world tilted. "What?" she whispered, unsure she heard him correctly. He repeated it, this time louder, firmer. "You have to remove it. I'm not ready for this." Lucy blinked rapidly, her breath catching. "User, it's our baby." "How can you say that?" But he was already pacing the room. "You know I'm not in the space for this kind of thing right now. Why would you let this happen?" She stood there, stunned by the shift in the air, watching the joy she'd built so carefully collapse like a sandcastle in a rising tide. He kept speaking about timing, stress, responsibility, how his job was unstable, how this was not the plan. But all she heard was the crack inside her heart growing wider, louder, deeper. They didn't sleep that night. They argued until their throats were dry. Lucy wept, pleaded, shouted. Usar accused her of betrayal. "You planned this, didn't you?" he said bitterly. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because a part of her knew he was right, but not in the way he meant it. She had hoped love would grow where duty was forced. But now there was only resentment curling its way into every corner of the room. Over the next few days, tension wrapped around them like smoke. Lucy refused to even discuss an abortion, her voice firm now even in sorrow. "I won't lose my baby," she told him through tears. User stopped touching her. Stopped talking unless necessary. Yet something unexpected happened. After a full week of silence, he sighed and muttered, "Fine, let's do the marriage thing." No proposal. No excitement. Just a reluctant agreement. Lucy should have felt alarmed, but instead, she clung to the only thing she could, hope. She told herself things would change once the child came, that he would come around, that all of this would make sense, eventually. And despite the coldness of his words, she smiled, because in her heart, she believed she had finally won him over. The traditional marriage was hastily arranged, muted, brief, and stripped of joy. Lucy's mother wore a proud face throughout the rites, thanking God that her daughter was finally settling down, though her eyes lingered too long on Usur's stiff posture. Usur's family came with the required gifts, said the right words, and left as quickly as they arrived. There were no long speeches, no dances, no teasing chants from aunties asking when the baby would come. Lucy wore a coral necklace over her lace blouse and wrapper, her makeup light and her smile practiced. She watched her reflection between events and whispered to herself that everything would fall into place soon. People said marriage was an adjustment. She told herself there's just needed more time. But the silence in User's eyes as he accepted her hand told a different story, one she pushed to the back of her mind. She had waited for this for too long to let uncertainty speak now. In the early days after the wedding, User put up what felt like effort. He came home early, sometimes rubbed her feet after dinner, even bought her roasted corn on the roadside when craving set in. Lucy clung to these gestures like they were promises. Each small kindness became a stitch in the unraveling fabric of her hope. She believed he was trying. And so, she tried even harder, keeping the house spotless, cooking his favorite meals, being cheerful no matter how heavy her body felt. She decorated the nursery corner in their modest bedroom with soft yellows and hand-sewn curtains, humming to the child growing inside her as if love could be created out of will alone. User didn't speak much about the baby, but he bought a crib once, unprompted. It was enough. Enough for her to believe they were moving forward. Enough for her to silence the quiet warnings that still stirred on cold nights when he turned away from her in bed, pretending to be asleep. When labor came, it was long and brutal. User stayed at the hospital with her, but more out of obligation than care. His words were few, his face unreadable. But when the child, a baby boy, finally arrived, Lucy forgot everything. She held her son with trembling hands and tears in her eyes, laughing through the pain. She had done it. She was a mother, a wife, a family. She watched User cradle the baby briefly, then hand him back to the nurse without a word. She chose to ignore it. At home, things grew quiet again. Days became routines, feeding, rocking, bathing. User started sleeping in the guest room without explanation. He stopped touching her, stopped kissing her goodbye. He rarely ate her meals, sometimes claiming he'd already eaten out. Lucy asked what was wrong one evening, her voice cracking. User didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I told you I wasn't ready. You wanted this, not me." His words fell like stones. She stared at him, her baby asleep in her arms, and suddenly the walls of her dreams began to tilt. She had chased a future so hard that she hadn't seen it was breaking her, slowly, painfully, piece by piece. The days turned into weeks, and Lucy began to feel like a guest in her own marriage. The house was no longer filled with soft conversations or shared laughter. It echoed instead with silence, an awkward, suffocating silence that clung to the walls and settled between them like dust. User moved through the flat like a man living with a stranger. He left early, returned late, and barely glanced in her direction when he walked through the door. Lucy tried to bridge the growing gap. She cooked his meals, left notes in his wardrobe drawers, even bought a new dress hoping he'd notice. He didn't. Once, she waited up with a full pot of okra soup, but he came back smelling of beer, grumbled something about being tired, and went straight to bed, his bed. The one in the guest room. She stood by the sink that night, washing dishes with numb hands, wondering if this was what becoming invisible felt like. Their baby, Chitubim, became her only source of warmth. He was growing fast, chubby cheeks, curious eyes, tiny fists that wrapped around her fingers with such trust it almost broke her. She poured everything into him, documenting his every little milestone, hoping User would show interest. She sent him pictures during the day, Chitubim smiling, rolling over, trying to babble. Sometimes User responded with a thumbs up, sometimes nothing at all. When she tried to talk to him gently, without accusation, he avoided her gaze, brushing her off with vague statements. "I'm dealing with a lot," he said once, without explaining further. He never mentioned love. He never said he was proud of her. He never touched her like a man touches his wife. The absence grew louder than any argument could. Lucy stopped bringing up the distance between them, afraid of hearing more truths she wasn't ready for. Instead, she focused on motherhood, wrapping herself in diapers, lullabies, and midnight feedings, anything to keep from unraveling completely. One Sunday afternoon, while folding baby clothes, Lucy caught User staring out the window, lost in thought. She approached him quietly and asked, "Do you ever think about how we got here?" His jaw tightened, and he spoke without turning. "I didn't choose this. I'm just existing in it." The words dropped like cold water on her chest. She waited for him to add something, a glimmer of hope, a soft contradiction. But none came. He left the room, and she sat back down, holding one of Chittibim's onesies in her hands. Her vision blurred. There was no fight, no screaming, no betrayal by another woman. Just this unbearable emptiness between two people who once shared secrets, laughter, skin. She had imagined hardship, yes, but not lovelessness, not indifference. She looked around their home, at the wedding photo on the wall that now felt like a stranger's memory, and for the first time, the word mistake formed fully in her mind, sharp and undeniable. Lucy noticed the shift before she could name it. User had begun leaving the house without saying where he was going or when he'd return. There were no quarrels, just cold detachment that settled into the routine of their lives like dust on a forgotten shelf. On most evenings, she would sit on the living room couch with Chittibim sleeping against her chest, straining to hear the sound of User's keys at the door. Some nights, he returned past midnight, the smell of alcohol clinging faintly to his clothes. Other nights, he didn't come home at all until morning. Lucy didn't ask any more. The first few times she had tried, he brushed her off with an irritated, "I needed space." So she stopped. Instead, she watched the clock, rocking her baby slowly, while thoughts crawled through her head, loud and impossible to silence. The home had become a place of hollow footsteps and unanswered questions, and no matter how many times she rearranged the furniture or opened the windows, she could not air out the sense of abandonment. She tried to distract herself with little things. She joined a new mothers' forum online, where women shared their joys, complaints, and questions. Some gushed about their husbands rubbing their backs during late-night feedings, or preparing bottles before dawn. Lucy smiled at those posts, but never replied to them. She only commented on the ones that spoke of exhaustion, of loneliness, of trying to keep a household from sinking when love had disappeared. In public, she still wore her wedding band, still posted pictures with captioned hearts and baby milestones. But inside, she knew it was a performance. One afternoon, while doing laundry, she found a strange receipt in User's back pocket, a bill for a hotel restaurant far from their neighborhood. 2 guests, a bottle of wine. She sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the slip of paper for a long time. Not because she didn't know what it meant, but because she had nothing left to say. No anger, no confrontation, just a silence that now lived in her bones. Eventually, she broke. It happened on a Tuesday, with the TV buzzing low and Chittibim playing with a plastic spoon on the floor. User came in, dropped his bag, and walked past her without a word. She followed him to the corridor, her voice low and steady. "Are you seeing someone else?" He paused, then turned slowly, his face calm. "Does it even matter?" The answer sliced through the last threads holding her together. She stared at him, hoping he would flinch, apologize, explain. Instead, he shrugged and walked away, closing the guest room door behind him. Lucy stood frozen in the hallway, the light from the sitting room casting a long shadow behind her. That night, she lay beside her child, listening to his soft breathing, and wondered if this was how love truly ended, not with betrayal or noise, but with the slow, daily erosion of care, until nothing was left but silence and cohabitation. It was a quiet morning when Lucy finally asked the question she had been afraid to form out loud. She had just finished breastfeeding Chittibim, who now lay asleep in a cot by the window. His fingers curled peacefully. Lucy sat at the edge of the bed, tying his shoelaces, dressed for work in his usual gray shirt and navy trousers. There was nothing special about the day. Nothing different in the way the fan creaked or the way sunlight poured across the tiled floor. And maybe that's why she found the courage, because the ordinariness made her feel like there was nothing more to lose. "Did you ever love me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. User paused, not looking up. His hand stilled. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout, thicker than any lie. Then, without facing her, he said, "I don't think I did. Not the way you wanted me to." The words landed like a blow to the chest, sudden and final. Lucy said nothing. She only stood still as her heart cracked into pieces too quiet for the world to hear. He left shortly after, as though the conversation had never happened. Lucy sat in that room for hours, surrounded by the things that had once meant hope: a wedding frame, folded baby clothes, half-read books on parenting. All of it now felt like props from someone else's story. She remembered how desperately she had clung to the belief that a baby would fix things, that marriage would anchor him, that love would grow if she just poured enough of it into the spaces he left empty. But sitting there, in the silence of his indifference, she realized none of it had ever truly existed, not the bond she imagined, not the partnership, not the love. It had been one-sided from the beginning. She had been in love alone, building a life on borrowed soil. And now, everything she thought she had secured was beginning to unravel, thread by thread. Her chest ached, not with anger, but with grief. The kind that comes when a dream dies slowly, right before your eyes. That evening, she stared out the window as the sky turned a shade of dull gold. Chittibim stirred softly behind her. Lucy thought of the men she had pushed away, men who had shown genuine interest, who had called, visited, waited patiently. She remembered one in particular, Say, a gentle civil engineer who had once brought her roses just because he heard she was stressed. She never returned his calls after Yuzar entered her life. She was so sure then, so confident that she had found something real. Now, with nothing but the sound of a ticking wall clock and the hum of distant traffic, Lucy felt the weight of every choice she had made, not because they were malicious, but because they had come from hope. And hope, she now understood, could be a dangerous thing when given to the wrong person. She wrapped her arms around herself, the room cool against her skin. She didn't know what the next chapter would be, but she finally admitted to herself this one was over. Lucy no longer cried. Not because the pain had passed, but because it had become a part of her, quiet, steady, always there like background noise. Mornings were mechanical now. She woke early, bathed Chittibim, prepared cereal he barely touched, and swept the house in long, slow strokes that gave her time to think. The silence between her and User had grown colder, yet somehow more comfortable. They no longer pretended. He came and went like a tenant, and she stopped trying to ask where or why. In the evenings, after putting Chittibim to sleep, she would sit on the veranda with a cup of warm water, staring into the dark like someone searching for herself in the distance. The streetlights flickered, the hum of generators filled the night, and in those hours, she would sometimes imagine what life could have looked like if she had made a different choice, if she had waited, if she had walked away before the pregnancy. But every what-if only deepened the ache in her chest. She began journaling again, in an old hardcover notebook she found at the back of her wardrobe. Each night she wrote letters, not to User, but to herself. To the girl who believed love meant sacrifice, to the woman who thought staying was a form of strength, to the mother who now carried both love and regret like twin burdens. She didn't sugarcoat the words. She wrote honestly about the fear, the loneliness, the self-blame that crept in during quiet moments. She admitted how foolish it felt to have given so much without ensuring she was wanted in return. And then she wrote about Chittibim, how he smiled with his whole face, how his tiny fingers gripped her own with surprising strength. He was her anchor, Her reminder that something beautiful had come from the wreck. That even in the middle of disappointment, there was still something to fight for. Yet even this joy carried a shadow, because she couldn't shake the feeling that her child would one day grow up and ask her why she stayed, and she wasn't sure she'd have an answer that didn't sound like surrender. One afternoon, while sorting clothes, Lucy found a faded envelope tucked between the pages of an old photo album. Inside was a birthday card from her late father, sent during her university days. The handwriting was bold, firm. "You are enough. Never beg to be loved. Let it find you freely, fully." She traced the words with her thumb, tears pricking the back of her eyes. It wasn't just about User anymore. It was about everything she had let go of, her laughter, her light, her belief in her worth. She folded the card gently and placed it on her bedside table. That evening, she gave Chittibim a longer bath than usual, humming softly as she washed his tiny toes and held him close. She didn't speak, but she made a quiet vow in her heart. She didn't know when or how, but one day she would rebuild, not just her life, but her sense of self. Because now she understood regret wasn't just about the past. It was a reminder not to repeat the same mistake in the future. It was a Thursday morning when Lucy woke up and didn't feel the usual weight in her chest. The light streaming through the window was soft, filtered through half-drawn curtains, and for once it didn't sting her eyes. She watched Chittibim sleep for a moment, his lips parted in a gentle pout, before she rose from the bed. She didn't rush. The house was quiet, as always. User had left before dawn, his absence marked by the scent of cologne and a half-drunk glass of water on the kitchen counter. Lucy made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, letting the steam rise into her face. She had no specific thought, no grand plan forming. But something inside her felt different. Not healed. No. The ache was still there, but it no longer ruled her. It no longer shaped her every step. It was simply a part of her now. A part she could carry without crumbling. Later that day, she did something she hadn't done in a long while. She called her elder sister, Enkim. They hadn't spoken properly since the wedding. Lucy had pulled away from many people, not out of pride, but because she didn't know how to admit that the life she had built was not what she had hoped. But Enkim didn't ask too many questions. She listened. She told her about a job opening at a private school where she worked, something flexible enough to allow Lucy care for Chittibim. They spoke for over an hour, and when the call ended, Lucy sat still, holding the phone against her chest. That conversation reminded her of who she used to be, the woman who had dreams of working with children, who once talked excitedly about opening a daycare of her own. Somewhere between the pain and survival, she had buried that version of herself. But now, slowly, she was beginning to dig her out. Not for User. Not even for Chittibim. For herself. That night, after bathing Chittibim and rocking him to sleep, Lucy stepped outside into the night air. The street was quiet, the neighbors' generators humming faintly in the distance. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and looked up at the stars. They weren't many, but they were enough. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The future still scared her. It was wide, uncertain, and she had no roadmap. But she had herself, and she had a choice. The same way she had chosen to love User, to stay, to hope, she could now choose to begin again. It wouldn't be easy. There would be judgment, whispers, maybe even failure. But for the first time in a long time, she was no longer paralyzed by fear. She touched her stomach lightly, remembering everything she had survived. Then she whispered to the dark, not as a prayer, but as a promise. I won't stay lost. I'm finding my way. And for the first time in months, the night didn't feel so heavy. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.